The headlines are screaming, social media is on fire, and the comment sections are absolute chaos. It's over. China just sold all U.S. debt. The dollar is finished. But here's the thing, nobody is slowing down enough to ask. What exactly does that mean? What actually happened behind the scenes, and why are governments, banks, and financial elites suddenly acting like something massive just shifted under their feet? Because if China really unloaded U.S. treasuries the way people think, this wouldn't just be a financial headline. This would be a global earthquake. For decades, the economic relationship between the United States and China has been one of mutual dependence wrapped in quiet tension. The U.S. prints the world's reserve currency. China manufactures the world's goods. America consumes. China saves. Those savings for years flowed straight into U.S. Treasury bonds, effectively funding American deficits while keeping China's own currency stable. It wasn't friendship. It was leverage on both sides. China became one of the largest foreign holders of U.S. debt not because it trusted America, but because it had few alternatives that were large, liquid, and stable enough to absorb trillions of dollars. Treasuries were the safest parking lot for surplus dollars, until they weren't. Over the past few years, something changed. Quietly at first, then all at once. China's reported U.S. Treasury holdings began falling, not crashing overnight, but steadily, quarter after quarter. The numbers told a story that mainstream headlines barely touched. This wasn't a panic sale, it was a controlled exit, and that's the part most people miss. China didn't wake up one morning and dump everything on the market. That would have collapsed bond prices, spiked U.S. yields, and destroyed the value of China's remaining holdings. Instead, the shift happened methodically. Bonds matured and weren't replaced. New purchases slowed. Holdings were restructured. Some assets were moved through intermediaries. Others disappeared from official reports altogether. So when people say China sold all U.S. debt, the real question is this: sold directly or removed strategically? Because those are very different scenarios, and both point to the same uncomfortable truth. China no longer wants to be financially tied to the United States the way it once was. Why now? Start with geopolitics. Sanctions changed everything. When the U.S. froze Russia's foreign reserves, it sent a message to every major nation holding dollar-denominated assets. Those reserves aren't truly yours if Washington decides otherwise. That wasn't just a punishment, it was a warning. China heard it loud and clear. Holding massive amounts of U.S. debt suddenly looked less like safety and more like exposure. A vulnerability. A lever that could be pulled against them in a future conflict over Taiwan, trade, or technology. Then, there's the debt itself. U.S. government debt has exploded. Trillions added in record time. Interest payments ballooning. Budget deficits widening even during periods of economic growth. At some point, creditors start asking uncomfortable questions, not about whether the U.S. can pay today, but what paying tomorrow looks like. More debt. More printing, more inflation. China doesn't need to predict a collapse to decide the risk-reward equation no longer makes sense. Now add the rise of alternatives. China has been building parallel financial systems for years. Bilateral trade agreements settled in local currencies. Gold accumulation at record levels. Development banks outside Western control. Energy deals priced without the dollar. These aren't symbolic moves. They're infrastructure. When a country builds exits, it's because it plans to use them. So did China sell all U.S. debt? Publicly reported data suggests their holdings are dramatically lower than their peak years ago. But what's more important than the exact number is the direction. Down. Consistently. Relentlessly. And here's where things get interesting. If China is no longer the buyer it once was, who is absorbing all this U.S. debt? The answer is uncomfortable. The Federal Reserve, domestic institutions, pension funds, banks, and, increasingly, indirect monetization through liquidity programs that don't look like traditional money printing, but function very similarly. In other words, the U.S. is increasingly funding itself. That's not immediately catastrophic. Governments can do this for a long time. But history shows it never ends quietly. The bond market already knows something is wrong. Yields have surged. Volatility has returned to what used to be considered crisis levels. Auctions sometimes struggle. Foreign participation is weaker. And every time rates spike, something else in the system breaks, forcing intervention. This is the loop. And China stepping back accelerates it. There's another layer most people aren't talking about. Selling doesn't always mean selling. It can mean lending through proxies, shifting custody, or converting treasuries into other dollar-based instruments that don't show up the same way on balance sheets. This creates plausible deniability, while still reducing direct exposure. So when officials say China still holds U.S. debt, that can technically be true while missing the larger reality. Control has changed. Intent has changed. Strategy has changed. And intent matters more than numbers. China is signaling something very clearly. They no longer believe anchoring their financial future to U.S. debt is worth the risk. What does that mean for regular people watching this video? It means volatility isn't going away. It means the era of cheap money is over. It means governments will face harder choices. Higher taxes, spending cuts, inflation, or financial repression. Probably some combination of all four. It also means the global system is fragmenting, not collapsing overnight, but slowly breaking into competing blocks. Different payment systems, different reserve assets, different rules. The dollar doesn't vanish in this scenario, but it loses exclusivity, and when something loses exclusivity, its power fades. That's the part they aren't telling you. This isn't about one dramatic sell-off. It's about a long exit from a system that no longer feels neutral or safe to its largest participants. China doesn't need to destroy the dollar. It just needs to stop supporting it. And that may already be happening. The irony is that this shift won't be announced with a press conference. There will be no official statement saying, "We're done." Because power doesn't move that way. It moves quietly, through balance sheets, trade routes, and reserve compositions. By the time the public fully realizes what changed, the system will already look very different. So when you hear "it's over," don't think collapse tomorrow. Think transition. Think stress. Think slow erosion rather than sudden explosion. Because the most dangerous moments in financial history aren't when everyone is panicking. They're when most people still believe nothing fundamental has changed, and something very fundamental has. China stepping back from U.S. debt isn't the end of America. To the end of an era where America could borrow endlessly without consequence from its biggest rival. What comes next depends on choices being made right now behind closed doors. And those choices will affect every currency, every market, and every person watching this video, whether they realize it yet or not.